the hard, on the driveway, in the dead of winter in Colorado. And while I'd love to be somewhere dockside in a warm place, it's still pretty nice to come up here on the boat, do a little reading and trip planning, listing some repairs that need to be made once the weather warms up, and preparing this video. Recently, we went out to San Francisco to sail this Pacific Seacraft Flicka with our sons and their close ones on the San Francisco Bay. Our younger son recently bought this 1979 Flicka. She's often called a blue water pocket cruiser. Perhaps it was destiny for a Flicka to be in our family. My wife and I seriously considered buying one of these back in 1980 after reading The Dove. That's a story of a young single sailor sailing a similar boat. We saw both the Flicka and the Orion at the Boston Boat Show in 1981, but at that time we were poor graduate students working very long hours, living in Nebraska far from any big water. We were new to cruising sailboats too, and we only had a 1973 Plymouth Belvedere, like this one, with a V8 engine to tow a boat, which would have been woefully inadequate for a Flicka. So it made more sense to instead buy a Catalina 22. Fast forward about 40 years to the present, we now enjoy sailing an Orion, and we're finally getting to sail on a Flicka, which, by the way, is Swedish for the word girl. As you see here, both of these boats are at the small end of the Pacific Seacraft family of sailboats. While the captain and the crew prepare the boat for our trip on the bay, let's get better acquainted with the Flicka. The fundamental design, her lines, deck, and hull shape originate from the mid-1800s. The story goes that naval architect Bruce Bingham, who had worked for Morgan Yachts in the 1960s, had several years earlier come across two derelict wooden sailboats, probably looking a bit like this, on a river estuary south of Wickford, Rhode Island. That's a bit of irony for us, since after we moved from Nebraska to Connecticut, and the first of two new crew arrived, we would launch our Catalina 22 just a clamshell toss away from Wickford. Anyway, what attracted Bingham to these boats was their strong sheer and bluff bow. He maintained those characteristics when designing the Flicka. Sheer helps keep the deck dry and gives the boat a bit more buoyancy with approaching waves, either fore or aft. And as for boats Bingham found, locals called them Newport boats, and he copied sketches of them from Chappell's 1951 book of American Small Sailing Craft. Bingham modified the sketches but maintained a length on deck of 20 feet, a beam of 8 feet, and just over 3 feet of draft, with a heavy displacement and long keel. Over the next 20 years, Bingham's design evolved, and by the mid-1970s, production of these boats began at North Star Boatyard. By 1978, Pacific Seacraft took over production, having evolved the design further. They were and still are very popular, and by the end of production around 1999, over 400 were built. There have been many ocean crossings with them, and even a few circumnavigations. While the hulls and deck are rather consistent in appearance, the interiors, particularly in the early years, varied. And that's mostly because the company released both total builds and kits for those who wanted to customize the boat layout a bit. One particular feature is an enclosed head. It's a little less commonly found, and on a rare boat you might find it on the port side. Although conceived as a cutter rig, as shown in the sketch, few are still rigged that way. It just makes the foredeck too busy, and most sailors now have a roller furling jib, which lessens the advantage of a staysail. Okay, let's have a look at the boat we'll be sailing. Yeah, she definitely has a salty traditional look about her, thanks to Bingham's influence, and by the good bit of art inscribed on the hull between the deck and the waterline. What I mean by art is the scroll work near the bow and at the stern, a cove stripe running the length of the hull, several inches below the deck, and then the carvel grooves running over much of the length of the hull, simulating a planked wooden hull. Here's a wooden boat to illustrate my point. And we have the same pattern on our Orion. It adds nothing for performance, but definitely adds to her good looks. Heading up to the top sides, have a look at the bow here. We see a 4-foot long bowsprit, an anchor platform, and a pulpit. The platform's a tight fit for me to fit in, but it's firm, and there's adequate room for an anchor there. Importantly, there's enough room to get work done there, including working on the roller furler. Originally, this boat had a hank-on jib, as roller furlers didn't become widely popular until the 1980s. Running from the bow pulpit to the stern rail are double lifelines. And back at the bow, there's a vent funnel to ventilate the chain locker. There's no windlass up here, but keep in mind, hauling in the chain on this cute small boat's easily done by almost anyone. The core of this deck is plywood. Most deck cores on boats this era are composed of balsa. It's light, but not as strong as plywood. But on a boat this size, the weight difference is not significant. Further aft is the coach roof, which has a nice arch to it. The mast is stepped onto a section of this arch that's reinforced with a glass composite beam. This design was intended to eliminate the need for a compression post down below in the cabin. This gives the cabin a very open feel, as we'll see here on another Flicka. The strengthened arch of this deck section was engineered to withstand 8,000 pounds of force. Nonetheless, some skeptical owners have installed the post. And in fact, beginning in 1983, a compression post was added as a standard feature. The mast is supported by standing rigging that many reviewers of this boat say is oversized for a boat this size. Stays and shrouds attached to chain plates that are mounted exterior on the hull. They are easy to inspect and replace when needed. Up on the coach roof, forward of the mast, we find a Loire hatch, and aft of the mast is a teak sea hood, within which the sliding entry hatch slides into. This little deck fitting on the port side is the Charlie Noble for the heater in the cabin. Running much of the length of the cabin on either side are 7-loop teak handrails that are convenient to grab onto when you need to go forward. Following the coach roof, I found ample room to walk forward on the deck. And we'll talk about the bronze port lights you see here when we get into the cabin. At the aft end of the cockpit, we'll find a good sturdy stern rail. And we'll find a beefy rudder hung on the transom and attached to the keel. On either side of the rudder are tandem backstays. On this boat, they're attached to standoffs, bringing the backstays further aft from the cockpit. They likely were added for the backstays to be out of the way of the main sheet traveler, which is mounted on the bottom stern rail tube. On every other Flicka I've seen, the backstays are secured to chain plates on the transom. Mounting the main sheet traveler to the stern rail is a very common modification to the original design. Here's a sketch of what I'm talking about. The original design had the main sheet attached to a traveler at the companionway. To reduce cockpit clutter, most Flicka owners moved the traveler to the stern rail, as you see on our boat. This yields big space savings in the 5-foot-long cockpit. I know from our experience that 4 people find it crowded back here, but keep in mind, this truly is a pocket cruiser designed comfortably for 1 or 2 people. Over here on the starboard side of the cockpit, we'll find a lazarette locker, and that's much the same kind of arrangement as we have on the Orion. The cockpit is drained by 2 scuppers forward in the cockpit, and from there the water is carried by a hose under the floor and out through fittings in the transom. Below the port side cockpit bench seat, we find the engine controls to the 1-cylinder Yanmar diesel. Oh, I only hear 1 cylinder running.
That's because it's a 1-cylinder.
Back up to the combing in the cockpit, we find 2 large winches for handling the jib sheets. Okay, let's have a peek below in the cabin. We find the cabin is open and spacious with max headroom. Oh, now there's a flashback to the 1980s. As I was about to say, The max headroom in the cabin is just under 6 feet, which is amazing for a 20-foot boat. The overhead is comprised of a vinyl covering with zipper access to fasteners to deck mounting hardware, with a layer of foam behind the vinyl, just like we have on our Orion. There are 2 smaller opening port lights and 1 large non-opening one on either side of the cabin. We found opening the smaller port lights along with the hatch that's forward of the mast provides very good ventilation down here in the cabin. Lower down, starting in the aft port side, there's a single berth under the cockpit. Well, that's a tight squeeze, probably okay for a small person or maybe an adult circus performer. Anyway, going forward, there's a rather complete galley here. Yeah, again, this is amazing that we're on a 20-foot boat. Check this out. There's a non-gimbal 2-burner stove. Further along, there's a sink with a hand pump. And then there's an ice box, a good sized one too for a boat like this. And hanging alongside is a fold-down table. At the bulkhead separating galley and V-berth, we see what I initially thought was a compression post. As I mentioned earlier, boats built before 1983 didn't have compression posts, as we see here on this Flicka. I now believe that the purpose of this post was to provide a means of mounting the Force 10 propane heater. Actually, I heard also that these heaters could use pressurized kerosene or diesel too, with minor hardware changes. Anyway, the heater is a nice addition to make this a comfortable cruiser for long-distance cruises. Moving on now to the V-berth, we find there's adequate space for 2 adults to sleep. And running along each side, there's a shelf for storing small items. Forward at the peak of the V-berth is a closet for storage. We'll find some life jackets here. And behind that is an enclosed locker for the anchor chain. Going aft along the starboard side, we find a long bench. Now, on some boats, this bench would be about 2 feet or so shorter to yield space for an enclosed head, as you see in these pics from other Flickas. On many boats, including this one, there is instead a porta potty under the V-berth. And as to this boat, I believe the owner will install a ventilated composter, or more properly named desiccator toilet here. Elsewise, below cushions all about the cabin, there's a good bit of space for storage. Just another reason these boats were picked for long voyages. Behind these removable stairs is the 1GM10 one-cylinder Yanmar diesel. There's a narrow, deep bilge and a bilge pump visible just forward of the engine, and we find good access here to service the engine's fuel and oil filters or for adjusting or replacing the alternator belt. There's a small access port in the cockpit floor to reach the rear of the engine. Now, this is a raw water-cooled engine as opposed to a fresh water-cooled engine, and the direct drive water pump. So there's no belt to drive the impeller. To replace the impeller, that would be in the pump body, and that's found just behind the crankshaft pulley. As I mentioned earlier, under the cockpit floor, above the engine, we find the 2 hoses that carry drain water from the scuppers aft to the fittings through the transom. And here's a nifty little feature. If the start battery's dead, you can hand crank this Yanmar engine to get it started. Alright, let's get out and sail. We'll be leaving our little harbor on the southwest side of Alameda, which is an island on the west side of Oakland and directly across the bay from San Francisco. We'll be sailing from the harbor into the north end of the bay on our first trip. Now, fall weather can be variable. Now, one day, winds reach 20 knots or more with rain showers. But a few days later, we sailed in sunny skies and 5 to 10 knots of wind. But even with the higher winds, this boat holds a straight track, and little force on the tiller is needed, even when close-hauled. She tracks so well that some Flicka sailors self-steer simply by attaching a simple wind vane directly to the rudder, or attach elastic bands from the tiller to the cleats on the coaming so that they can self-steer over short stretches. On the windy day we were out, we met short, steep, 3 to 4 foot tall chop when leaving the harbor. In that sea state, the boat hobby horses, but as we got out further on the bay, the wavelength increased, and we got a comfortable ride. We sailed with a single reef in the main, and about half of the jib rolled in. She heeled about 15 degrees and 20 knots of wind, and even though there's enough going on to keep us occupied, there's almost always something interesting to see about on the bay. On this day, we passed by an interesting sailing drone. And then earlier in the day, on the way to the boat, we saw this floating by. Back to sailing, we made it a short day, as it was also cool and wet. We were rather new to this boat, but it was revealing to see how well she handled in moderate to strong winds and chop. The next couple of times out were blissful, much warmer, sunny, with gentle breezes. We again sailed down into the north end of the bay, and later on, we sailed well down into the south end of the bay. There's not a lot of wildlife out here in the middle of the bay. We spot gulls, herons, ducks, geese, closer to shore. And over at the harbor, we spotted a black-crowned night heron right here at the helm. Most of the entertainment is looking at the cityscape, watching passing ships, and passing under bridges. We did take in some fantastic views of downtown San Francisco and Oakland, which at night become beautiful. Well, I hope you enjoyed that brief tour and sail on the San Francisco Bay on our son's Flicka. I'll close out this video with a couple more minutes of sailing on the bay, but before that I just want to mention that we finally got our gudgeon. It took 4.5 months in all of our sailing season for it to arrive. Anyway, I'll have an upcoming video on rudder restoration and installation of that gudgeon in a future video coming up soon. Till then, take care, safe travels, stay healthy.
Far north, south, I once from. Austin got me under his thumb. I signed up for the whole damn run. Can't get off halfway.
Just a young boy longing to go to see this old land. Wasn't meant to be, oh no, no. He got his feet wet once, twice, figured he was ready to throw the dice and sing, sing. In the Gulf of Mexico, coming straight off of a hurricane low, low. Time to go. But the waves keep on building.
We can take you straight there.
Oh yeah, we can go straight to the field dock.
Yep.
Alright. I don't know anything else. We do keep going here, but it's because it's not bad.
We'll stop this right.
You got about a foot to go.